Let's try that again. Hello, my name is Karsh Goblin. This is GoblinCaveTV, total professionals here. And this is our TTRPG book club. It has been a while. I've been struggling to get a lot of projects up and running. And as such, this is the last thing we do each week, in theory each week. And thus the one that's going to get put off. It is a part of the channel I do enjoy. It's something that I really like, and that is looking through role-playing books, different role-playing systems which are lesser known or lesser played, and just dispelling some of the myths and looking into some of the systems and showing that they're not that complex and not that more difficult than what you may have played previously. This is a recorded for YouTube specifically, but after we do our recording, we then will just chat to everybody who comes in. Now, that said, today we have something very special. Today we have the second ever published TTRPG. So we're talking about Tunnels and Trolls. You have probably never heard of it. It was published a year after Dungeons and Dragons was published, and it was designed as an easier way of getting into role-playing, an easier and cheaper alternative than Dungeons and Dragons. It has very archaic systems and rules, but also some very innovative rules at the same time, which seems a bit strange, but I really like it. And although I've marked it down as rules medium, that's only because while the rules are more complex than what we understand these days, they're actually not that complex. They're just very different to what we usually do. So we also, as always, have Syrinscape in the background, because Syrinscape does amazing audio, and who else than Syrinscape to accompany this review of a role-playing game? Loving Syrinscape. They're not a sponsor, but I do love them. So this is the book. This is the tome that we're talking about, which is Tunnels and Trolls Deluxe Edition. Now, the Deluxe Edition is the 9th edition, thereabouts, of the game. They published quite a few in the early years of little revisions. What I really like about this is that it will actually talk about the previous rules and why they've changed the rules. It's the first time I've seen in a role-playing game, in a core rule, not just a quick start or etc., or an adaptation or conversion PDF. This in a core rules actually will go through and say, in a previous edition, this is the rule, but we changed it because, and it'll give the reasonings. And I think that's amazing that they actually give the reasonings there. So it's from Flying Buffalo Games, which I've never heard of before. I'd actually never heard of this game before until I saw it randomly in a bookshop and went, wow, that is so awesome. I just thought it was a pun or send-off of Dungeons and Dragons, which it kind of is. But it's so long. This is 45 years old that trademark is like, well, they've been using the same trademark as well for 45 years. So they can't really, yeah. Oh, well. So let's get into the normal screen. So, Tunnels and Trolls, I've classed as rules medium, and as I said, it's kind of it's complex, but the only reason why I've got it as rules medium is because while it is complex, I don't see it as more complex than what we do these days with a lot more of the modern games. I don't see it as more complex than maybe a Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, or even a Pathfinder 2nd edition, and even Pathfinder 1st edition is borderline that medium to high rules there, or high complexity. And I don't see it really as more difficult than any of those. I just see the rules which I've been reading as very, very different. They're not as complex, they're just different in style and in form, and they are very old school in thinking, very math related, but at the same time less so than you'd think. It's from Flying Buffalo Games. You can check that out at flyingbuffalo.com, and you can even get shirts. I saw shirts even listed in the back of the book. Become a Wizard, read a book. I think it's awesome. So it was first published in 1975. Again, it was designed as an easier version of Dungeons and Dragons. It's got some really innovative systems, and the most innovative system is that combat, like the combat round, there's no turns. There's two sides of combat, and both sides roll. Both sides roll, and then like the victor doesn't take as much damage as the person that loses the roll in the end. And I think that's pretty cool. That's very different. But we'll get into that. We'll get into the details. So another thing about the system is also the book is it's pretty much all black and white. I mean, it's done in black and white when we're used to full color publications. So it's done a little bit cheaper than what we'd usually expect. There is a section in the middle with like the full color section. Wow. And I've seen that in a few games, like a few systems, which again, the budget a bit lower. They're almost, it's a lower budget in the publication, but I think the 45 years of the rules is a quality compensation, you could say, for that. I think the last rules, this version itself, I think is 2015. So this in itself is about 5 years old, maybe 6 now in 2021. So it's not that old. But again, like it does branch back into the core systems, and it doesn't seem to have changed its core systems throughout the years, unlike other game systems like Dungeons and Dragons when it went from 2nd edition D&D to 3rd edition, where they absolutely totally revamped everything. Then they tried to redo it again in 4th, and then they went backwards, similar to 3rd edition in 5th edition. So these at least have kept the same ideas, the same flow all the way through. They've just been refining it over 45 years. So let's get into it. I've got some notes. I rarely do take notes on these, but this is one I thought I really need to take notes for. So it kind of needs it, and it kind of warrants it, because this is a legacy product. I hate that word, but it's fitting in this stage. So we'll go to the preamble. So the introduction to TTRPG, so Deluxe Tunnels and Trolls. So fantasy gaming and role-playing games have changed a lot in almost 4 decades since TNT was first developed. This edition retains many of the early old-school conventions of the genre, in part because that is what makes TNT recognizably the game it is. Expect that going in, but in addition, certain mechanics from the interim editions have been carried forward with some entirely new content as well. I expect the game to change or die because nothing is ever perfect. I hope that this edition will prove to be a lasting, definitive version of the game for years to come. So that's quite an honest look. It's not perfect, but it is what it is. And again, like the idea of like, this is archaic. This is really old school. Accept that before it's not going to be modern. And so come into the system with that idea that this is old school. And I like that idea. So one of the old school conventions is the basic concept of the game. Here people have many backgrounds and kindreds imagined to live in an alternate world where fantasy is alive and magic works. A world with similarities to the fantasy worlds of the fiction and literature. Some of these people choose a life of adventure and daring do. Oh, it's so weird. And are the characters run by the players. For games played face to face, someone in the group has to have an adventure for the characters to dare to undertake. Ideally, the games master, will create a situation for the players to explore, and the GM, games master, might purchase or adapt a previously published adventure. Tunnels and Trolls also has solitaire adventures for those unable to find groups for play, or their playtime is limited. So one of the things I have noticed when looking for this, looking around at the TNT system, is that there is a lot of solitaire or solo games, probably more so than any other system that I've seen. And that was kind of a shock that there's like, I like the solo game from time to time. I like the idea that it's almost a choose your own adventure, but in a role-playing setting. And some people do them really well. Call of Cthulhu, their stuff is amazing for their Alone Against series. Others don't do them as well. So I'd be curious to see how they work as a solo. But I think it's really interesting that they do have such a huge emphasis on solo games. Although again, this talks about face-to-face gaming. We don't even do face-to-face gaming on the channel. We do 4 games a week these days. So it's kind of like, even since this was published 5 years ago or 6 years ago, the atmosphere has changed. COVID in 2020 again just really hit home that face-to-face is not always an option. So yeah. So it goes on and goes on. Again, it talks about the style is about that group effort where everybody is there to have fun. There's no winning. It's a cooperative, collaborative storytelling where everybody is putting in the effort to get something out, to be enjoyable and to have fun. So there's a lot there. It also talks about this area also talks about if you're a new GM, it might be best to start with a pre-made adventure. It cuts down a lot of time of creating a dungeon or creating a story, to have a pre-existing module to streamline all the process of making something. So there's a lot of bits and pieces. I really like this preamble. It's a nice one. Some of them are very full of themselves. This one is certainly not. One of the things I find about Tunnels and Trolls is that it doesn't take itself too seriously. At the same time, it knows what it is. It knows it's not professional, or it knows it's not a AAA professional, like having a massive team of 30, 50, 100 writers. But at the same time, it also knows it's got quality in there. So it's very realistic in how it talks to the reader, and I like that quite a bit. So we'll skip a couple of pages. We'll go to page 9 and page 8 down the bottom. So creating character. So what we have here is when Tunnels and Trolls was first created, dice, polyhedral dice, that D4, D6, D8, D10, D12 and D20 was not a thing. Like, they were super rare, you couldn't find them. They pretty much, you could only get them with Dungeons & Dragons games. And they just weren't common. These days you can go to any gaming shop and just pick up a set of like the multi-set dice. Very, very common. Or online, of course, nothing, like super common. But back in the day, 1975, it was not common. So this game relies on one set of dice, one style of dice, which was super common. D6. D6 you could find in board games, Yahtzee, anything like that. You could get a bunch of them, and they were very easy to pick up. So it's kept D6, and it's stayed with D6. It's never changed. So it stays with it. So you generally will be running with 3d6. Some rolls you might have, with some weapons you have multiple d6, so up to I think 7 or so d6, but it's generally d6 is your base. Similar to Dungeons and Dragons and other systems, more in the current era, characters are 3d6 to essentially get your attributes, get your stats, your core abilities. The names of those abilities are a bit different. Your prime attributes. So your prime attributes, a little bit stranger. Another thing when you're rolling your 3d6, if there's a triples, so if there's 3 1s, or if there's 3 3s, or whatever it is, you put an asterisk in that character creation, and then later on you can deal with it later, but something special happens if you get that. So with your prime attributes, you have strength, constitution, dexterity, speed, IQ, which is intelligence. So it's actually listed as intelligence, but IQ is the abbreviation. And whiz is not wisdom. Whiz is wizardry, luck, and charisma. So that's a bit of a difference. So they do kind of play out kind of normally. So we'll go down to wizardry. So wizardry is a measure of how much creme or magical potency, also called mana, you have. So that's what the wizardry is about. So it actually makes, like, it's an active stat. Intelligence, IQ, what you would expect. Luck, it's kind of just a blind, like, universe on your side or not. So, and speed is actually an active one where it makes a difference in how far you can actually move. So it kind of works. So yeah, the attributes, the core attributes, a little bit different, but if you're used to like 6 or 8 core attributes, you'll be able to pick them up. I used to play, I tried to get my friends to get used to the AD&D alternate attributes, where it splits, say, strength into brute power, or like carrying capacity, like fast twitch and slow twitch, and agileness and reactionary and balance, I think. Yeah. So for Dex, so there's different bits and pieces. I liked the split attributes. They just, but that was years ago. Again, you have just a little bit different, but easily adaptable. Not a huge difference which will just throw people off. So we'll go to the different kindred. So kindred in this game are essentially the good kindred, that is. They're your player characters. They're your player races. So your good kindred are humans, dwarves, elves, hobs, fairies, and leprechauns. So if you don't know what the hobs are, hobbits essentially are hobs, or what D&D went through was halflings. That's because hobbits is copyright. So hobs, fairies, and leprechauns, they're mythical, and so they're not really copyrighted. But yes, fairies and leprechauns are player characters in this. And if you notice these tables here, so this is your stats. So a human has 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1 across the range. A dwarf, though, has, say, 2 in strength, 2 in con. What does that mean? When you're rolling strength, double it. So it's 2 times. But their luck is 0.75. So it's going to be less. And that's how it starts moving some of the things around. So I like that this is right from the get-go. This is how you do, like, this is the modifications. This is how things change. So the other thing I want to touch on before we get too far removed is personal adds. So personal adds is something that's used in combat. So any of your combat stats, so your strength, your con, your dex, I think your speed as well, those parts, anything over 12 give you a +1 in combat, and it just adds to your combat, and it adds to your rolls, which is actually pretty important when you get into combat. So you want your highest amount in that if you're going to be a combat character, and you just want them above 12. Doesn't matter how far above them, but you want them above 12 to give you more bonuses when it comes to combat. So of course this is the good kindred. There's bad kindred, which is essentially the monsters. And there's going to be a lot of similarities to a lot of fantasy games, because this is a generic style fantasy game, that, like, similar to pretty much all the other ones you have. They'll have very similar monsters. They just call them kindred instead of races, etc. And I like that idea of kindred. We've got Pathfinder 2 removing the whole race idea from there, and they're calling they're changing the name of race to something else, and this is an original, not race but kindred instead. So what I want to also go into is, we'll go to page 29. So I don't go into a lot of detail on everything, because this is a massive book. This is a 360 page book. So we're going to go into little parts and just touch on just little things that I think are really amazing. So adventure points or experience points, same thing. In this, they're called EP or AP, and it's kind of a weird thing. Like previous editions, they called it AP and like experience, like they're interchangeable, same thing. So the experience points in this, they can be gathered through, well, Dungeons and Dragons first edition, which this was a counteract to that. You could only get experience by gold. So it wasn't killing monsters that got you gold, it was bringing gold. So killing monsters gave you no experience, but gold did. So you essentially, the gold that you took out of a dungeon was your experience for that adventure. It was only when you left the dungeon that you got your experience, based on the amount you brought out. So in this, they changed things quite dramatically. So yes, slaying monsters does give you experience points, but it's not just that. Saving rolls. Now, saving rolls is essentially a skill check. This is the first time skill checks were ever even around, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But skill checks essentially give you experience, and they can give you more experience than pretty much anything. Spellcasting also gives you experience. Special events, in case, as in doing something, doing something towards your adventure, towards your like solving a puzzle, etc., give you experience points. Brilliant idea. This was so innovative and so new 45 years ago, because D&D, it was only the money that you brought out of the dungeon gave you experience points. They're giving you rewards for solving puzzles. They're giving you rewards for doing skill checks. They're giving you rewards for even casting spells. Most systems these days don't even give that. They only give for killing monsters. Realistically, they only give for killing monsters. They may say in their rules that you can do this, but people don't. One of the things I'm really impressed with the Paizo Adventure Pass for Pathfinder 2 is that they are constantly giving little drips and drabs of experience for solving puzzles, for recognizing things, for essentially skills. But this is 45 years ago that this was written, that this is there. Yes, it has changed over time, but still, the core parts is amazing. Now, the other thing is, what's the experience points represent? Now, these days we see experience points. Okay, you get say 1,000 experience points, you go up a level. This is not that. This is again innovative, where you're spending your experience points to level up your character, to actually give your character specific things. So you can spend your experience points to actually increase your abilities. If you have an ability that is 7 and you want it to go to 8, you have to spend 70 ability points. Done. 70 experience points done, and you've now got 8. Now the level ups where that comes in quite importantly, where if you are at first level, so you can start at 0 level, or you can start first level, or even second, or even higher, because of reasons. But how that works is that the highest ability point that you have in all of your skills is your level. Indicates your level. So 1 to 9, if your highest one is not even past 9, you are level 0. If you are between 10 and 19, you're at level 1. 20 and 29, level 2, and 30, 39, etc., level 3. That's how it goes up. So you can just dump everything into increasing one ability's point up and up and up and up just to get your levels. And it can give you some benefits. But if there's a skill check or saving roll, which doesn't go off that one stat which you're amazing at, you're gonna fail. And that could be a trap. That could be a trap skill check or skill roll. Saving roll, which you're going to fail because you've only got one stat, which is amazing. So you can play around with having really, really one-dimensional high-level characters or generic and essentially good at all trades characters, just by your abilities and how you put them around and shuffle them around. And I think that's a really interesting way of doing things. So there are benefits of both styles, but it's up to the player to determine kind of where they want to be. And for me, I would be curious to play quite a few of these, and I would probably play the same, say, solitaire game again and again to get an idea of kind of how I would like to play. Would I like to min-max, or would I like to go generic? Because if you go generic, you're not leveling up very high, but you've got a lot of across-the-board skills. So I really, really like that idea that they do have those two alternates there. So another thing I want to go, we're still going through these. There's a lot to go through today, a huge amount, because there's just so many bits and pieces. Again, 360 pages. A lot of this stuff can be archaic, but some of this stuff is also innovative for today's time as well as from back then. So in the talk about the character creation and, okay, this is your starting equipment, blah, blah, blah. This is your starting money, buy, blah, blah, your equipment. I found this sidebar, and I'm really, really impressed with this sidebar. Other ways to equip a character. After you have played a while, starting a first level character becomes routine. Equipping characters should not become tiresome, a tiresome impediment, and there are creative ways to get past this stage. Here are a few ideas. The Payday Loan. You take out a loan from a business, and essentially your first adventure or your first several adventures is paying them back for the weapons and for the items that you've loaned. The more equipment that you take out, the more time you're paying it back. But the better you're going to survive, especially in the early levels. And I really, really like that. There's the wealthy patron, a wealthy semi-retired adventurer thinks you have potential and loans you money or gear. The tinkerer's folly, a second-hand and second-rate equipment can be at hand. So there's also equipment variables in this as well. So that's a huge bigger thing, and I think it's in the core. I've seen it in optional rules, in a lot of games throughout the years. This is the core section where it has equipment, qualities is probably the best way of putting it. And I like that. I do like that. That's a part of the system, because not everything is the same. Not everyone's got the same quality of bits and pieces. So yeah. I should probably, before we go too far into bits and pieces, there's the three classes that you can play. Are fighter, mage, and rogue. So fighter, combat character, pretty self-explanatory. They hit things, they tank, they wear the armor, etc. The mage, spellcasting, lots of diverse different spells. You can do bits and pieces, there's buffing, etc., as well as damage. The rogue gets a lot of talents. Now, talents is something which is essentially a +2 here or +1. Actually, I believe they're all +2s. But a +2 to all archery, or +2 to or maybe a specific thing. So with the talents, it can be a bit weird. So you can have like a very open, say +2 to all archery. And so every time you do archery, you get +2 to that roll. Cool, sure. But you could also ask for a specific one. So a specific one is going to be very limited in scope, but it's not just going to give you a +2, but it could also how can I put this it can lessen the degrees of difficulty for the challenge, if that makes more sense. So an archery contest where one person has a +2 to all bow shots, sure, he gets +2 his rolls, sure, but it's going to be like, say, difficulty 5 to do that. So when you're doing your saving rolls or skill checks, they have difficulties, and so that difficulty can be like 5, 6, whatnot, and it just adds to the number that goes up and down. But someone that's got a speciality in, say, target archery could drop that difficulty from 5 to maybe 4, or 5 to maybe 3, which will give him 10 less that he needs to get on that roll, which is much more better than just get +2, because it's such a narrow field. So you can petition the GM that, oh, does this apply in this situation? The GM, oh yeah, you do have this. Oh sure, there you go. This is your difficulty. And the person that's got like +2 to his bow is like, oh, but I really should have done that. And that's where it comes in. So you've got the rogues get a lot of these skills. You can get them, like everyone gets at least one, and you can get them for other stuff, but the rogues is where they all come in. Like they get a lot of these little bonuses all over the place. So they're the jack of all trades. There's also specialists. Specialists, remember how I mentioned like that asterisk on the triples for your D6s? If you roll triples on your D6s, you get to re-roll. You get that number, and then you roll again. If you roll triples again, you keep on stacking. So you can start off with 30, 40, 50 in a stat. That's a specialist. I really hate exploding dice. I've always hated exploding dice. This system uses exploding dice, and it uses it in character creation, where you can have someone with like 30 in strength. So that's a specialist, and that's like the 4th character class you can do. And they are abominations, outcasts, or like over the top powerful in whatever stat which exploded, essentially. That for me, that's one of the things I don't like about the game, is that section, because you could have players. I don't mind the whole having first levels, second levels, third levels in a group, because one person that's got a 3rd level has put all their experience into one single stat. One person that's got first level in the same group is generic right across the board and good at everything. So they've got the same amount of experience, they've just spent it differently. So I don't mind that. But having a character start so far above because of one stat exploded in character creation, that's what gets me. So they're the classes, and that's a little bit on the exploding dice. Exploding dice also comes into other places too. So we'll move into we'll touch on some of the other equipment and stuff as well. So we'll go to 34. So with the equipment, again, we don't always go into the details of character creation, but these are things that I really liked about the system and about the character creation. So with equipment, you might notice there when it's talking about swords, there's short sword, medium sword, long sword. They're very generic, aren't they? But on the examples, there's a gladius, punch sword, short sword, sword cane, broadsword, rapier, heavy gladius, shark tooth. So what they've got here, they've genericized essentially the initial description, and they've just got examples. So this is essentially a 24 to 30 inch weapon. depending on what setting you're in, this is kind of what, like, you can just rename it for your setting, which I really, really like. Because it means that you're not locked in. Oftentimes you're locked into, this is what it's called, and then if you're in a different setting, you might need to rename it, and then you have to do all the work yourself. In this, it just gives you the ability to just go right from the start. This is the open style. You can put to any campaign setting, but it's got your examples, which will fit pretty much all campaign or most campaign settings in the fantasy genre. The other part is that weapons require a minimum stat. So they require minimum strength and minimum dex to be able to wield effectively. You can use them without those. It's not easy, it's not good, but you can. And so I like that that's there. A lot of things which I see in this game, I've seen a lot of role-playing games or role-playing style computer games throughout the past. They've got into this idea of like, when you spend your experience to level up stats, to pull stats up high and whatnot. Same thing here. You've got minimum requirements for certain weapons. Same thing here. I think a lot of the computer game industry over the last 40 years has had an influence from this book. Because I don't see a lot of role-playing games having much influence from... I do see some influences, yes. But some of these systems you don't see in a lot of games because it seems a bit more overly complicated. Yet they complicate their systems in different ways. This game simplifies the back end of the system quite a bit, but the initial hit is complex, which is why I still have it as that medium for my thought process. So we'll go down a little bit as well. So we've got the weight, we've got the gold, we've got the requirements, you've got your damage dice. Again, it's all in D6. You've got trollish swords as well, so they can get really, really, really big. But again, they would require 35 strength. But again, remember, you're putting strength up, so you can have a human with a trollish sized sword because they end up getting that much strength. They also need the dex on top of that to do it. But what you'd see in the MMOs, and it says they're Japanese anime, yeah, the improbable, the wrong, the over the top. That's what you can have if you are that big. And you do get that big if you go up in adventures. So where was I? I was going to go to 45 is the next one. So there's a lot of weapons, by the way, a huge amount of weapons. So we'll just scroll through this weapon section. There's a lot here. There's lots of different types of daggers even, which you don't usually get. Handheld, like half the weapons, goes through all the bits and pieces there. And what I like about this is the poundage per head of the weapon for the half weapon. Not the size of the weapon. This is like how heavy the weight is of the head, because that's the thing. Like you don't. That's not what you'd usually think, but this is someone that's made the system and made it from an intellectual perspective of, okay, no, this is actually what is important about this weapon, how heavy that weight is, not the size of the haft or whatever, but how heavy that weight is. So it's a very different take on kind of how you think about everything. And I really do like how they've looked at it, how they've thought about it. It's, again, I think it's a very intellectual side of things. Not the math heavy, but intellectual side is how I like to see this. And you've got light spears, you've got spear throwings, lances, etc. Even wizard staffs, double-ended staffs, so double-ended sword staff, bits and pieces, pole arms. There's a lot of different things. Again, and these are mostly generic descriptions. The detailed descriptions are on the other side. Again, you've got light bow, and it's got the poundage. So for someone that's done archery like myself, God, I shot archery as a teenager. I got state and national records, still around from 20 plus years ago, 25 years ago more. So this for me, I can understand that. I know what a 30-pound bow feels like. I know what that is. That is a light bow, and this is how much damage that does. This is the range for that, what that does, and that's realistic range as well. I can see from my own experience that's a realistic range. 30 to 50 pound. Again, that's a standard bow. That's what I used to shoot. I used to shoot 38 and 45. So that's nothing for me. Heavy bow, 50 to 75. That is a heavy bow. That's starting to get like more bow hunting style. Then it's got heroic bows. 120-pound bow. That's war bow. That's war bow stand. The trollish bow, they've got, it has Herculean bow. The war bow, the English war bow is about 180 pounds. And there's a handful of people that actually can shoot them these days. It takes lifetime of work and extending, and there's a lot of people that are working themselves up to it. It's become a pseudo fad actually. Like 150-pound bow shooting, like proper long bows. But yeah, that's possible, and I can understand, as someone that's done archery, that makes sense to me. Like I've looked into that field, that actually totally makes sense to me. And then it's got crossbows, and doesn't go into now the poundage. In this case with crossbows, it's the mechanism, hand drawn, lever drawn, pulley drawn, reel cranked. Again, this is specifically what is important to that weapon. So really brilliant ways of writing it and getting across the understanding of what this is. And again, throwing rocks. What does a pebble do? Well, d6 damage apparently. It requires 5 strength and a little bit of dex. It's simple. Really, really simple. 30 yards. That's doable. It's not... I see other systems as 10. 30 makes sense for me. You can throw a rock 30 meters. 30 yards. So yeah, it's slings, staff slings. These are lost in a lot of systems, but they're here because they were common in a lot of warfare. Slings and staff slings, they were old school warfare. Then you've got throwing stars, chakram, boomerangs, African throwing blades. It's all here. I mean, it's amazing. There's so much stuff here. And then you've got firearms, guns. Now, guns in a lot of systems are super stupid. But they've got it here. The costs are extreme. You can put it into settings. The damage is also pretty extreme too. But it also gives you a proper description of what the gun is and what the style is, which actually is a good idea. And I love this picture as well. But anyway, because you've also got field cannons, etc. So Almond Shields. So we'll go to the Almond Shields. Move on. Almond Shields, again, has a very generic, what name of it? Plate. But then it's got, okay, what is plate on the example? Iconic European Knights armor. That's what plate armor is. Folded paper, Chinese military armor. So great strength is required and weight if it's waterlogged, because it does get wet. So it's got 2 stats there. It's got 9 for normal and 11 for if it's wet. But in this case, you need certain amounts of strength to carry certain armors. Again, they do feel realistic, as much realism as you can, but it also costs you dexterity. So it's not going to say like -5 to your dexterity. It's got -3 to plate. Plate, it's kind of weird to say, but plate doesn't really hamper you that much. Properly fitted plate armor does not hamper the wearer of the armor. And that, again, it sounds weird, but the reason why where the joints are and the articulations are is to not hamper the wearer. Like, there's been a lot of years in design to do properly fitted plate armors and armors over the years, and kind of that's what it's about. So yeah, but again, there's a lot of different lists of different, like you've got from cloth up to plate, light leather, studded leather, and even cloth armor, quilted fabric, ring joint. There's a lot of different things there, and it's really, really the details in them on what they are is actually really good. This like my thoughts on this is like, especially the arms and armor. This is, for me, it's almost as if it's been written by a historian, someone that really knows their stuff. I'm very impressed with how those done, and a lot of like just throwing out for example D&D. A lot of their weapons and armor equivalations, or essentially they're so far off mark. These at least for me feel right and feel realistic. But yeah, and you've got part armor, etc., etc. So there's a lot there. So never underestimate the value of a good pair of gloves. You never know what might be hiding at the bottom of the treasure chest. Portman's Delver Advisor. So there's little things like that throughout the place. Armor also takes the number of hits as well. That's also something that's important in some of the subsystems of the thing. So we're going to actually go into saving rolls. I've mentioned it several times. Saving rolls is one of the big core systems, which is actually made this essentially the first game which had skill checks. So these are rolls that are called for to climb something or to balance across a tightrope or whatever it is. And the equivalation of it is a bit annoying. So essentially what it is, like each the difficulties are per level. So a level 1 is 15 difficulty, and then level 2 is 20, and it essentially goes up by 5 each time. So what we do is we note what the number currently represents on the attribute roll. So what are you rolling? In this case, it says luck, or LK for luck, as an example. You subtract the number on the attribute from the difficulty level. So if it's level 1, it's 20. So you subtract your attribute from 20. Say you've got 12 luck, and the difficulty of the check is a level 1. So you take 12 from level 1, from that 20. The difficulty then becomes 8. That's the number you want to hit, 8. You roll 2d6. If you roll a 3, that's it. That's a fumble. 3 is your fumble, not 2, but 3, because 2s and even numbers, that's how you explode your dice. So if you roll a 2, you roll again. If it was a 3, you roll again. If it was even 2 6s, you roll again, and you keep on adding them, etc. But either way, in this example, you're just trying to get them higher than 8. So you've got 12 luck, DC is 20, you minus 12 from 20, your DC is now 8, you roll your 2d6, and all you have to do is get equal to or over that. Rolling 3 is always going to be a miss. If you have, say, 30 in a skill and your DC is only 20, you still have to have 4 as your DC. It only goes down to 4. And that's pretty much it. That's all you need to do. That's it. That's how you do it. It's just really how it works. It does mention that previous editions have levels changing things, and explains why they actually took that out. But again, it's not too so I'm going to go to the basics of combat. Now, the basics of the combat is probably the more complex of all the systems, because you've got 3 different versions of combat. You've got spellcasting, missile, and melee, all treated slightly differently, but also all at the same time. So the most basic version of combat, which I've written down, is this: all players attack using their personal adds. So the personal adds, which I mentioned at the start, which is anything 12 or higher on their combat attributes. Innocent monsters also roll against that. You compare the two numbers. You compare the two numbers, and the side that loses takes the difference between. So the side that loses takes the difference between hits, and armor then takes off some of those, and then they take off con as damage. Your con is your hit points. I think magic is also hit points too, for magic damage. But yes, you take your con is your hit points. So having con is a pretty important thing. There's another part in that is if any 6 that are rolled in all those rolls on either side are automatic hits. They are essentially just lucky hits that get through, and each one of those is 1 hit. So even if you win, you can still take a few hits of those lucky rolls that get through. But that's about it. It gets more complex, but the idea is that the combat system, it's probably more, it'll take longer for me to explain the combat system, way longer for me to explain the combat system than what it would be to play an entire combat out. Because everyone's rolling at once, and then everyone rolls at once, and it's fast. We've had shows where we have had combats for 2 hours. 2-hour combats. That gets boring. I had a D&D session, 18-day session years ago, 8-hour combat. We started about, it was actually longer. We went to dawn. I can't remember when we started, but we went to dawn. That happens. This is quick. I mean, the only time when you get bogged down is when, say, both sides have got a lot of armor, because the armor takes off all that damage. If both sides are fairly even and both sides have a lot of armor, that's the only time where it's not going to do much, and you get in the stalemate. And there's rules for stalemates, which is great. They've understood that. Oh wait, no, this is an issue, so they've fixed it. Brilliant. So I mean I think they've done a lot of really amazing things in this. The setting itself is settingless in a way. The initial editions were settingless. This edition at least has, how can I put this? It has the world from the creator's point of view. It has Troll World, which is his homebrew world for his homebrew campaign. This is Troll World. This is a map of Troll World. Ralph, the dragon continent, which let's see, does it look like a dog to me? Totally looks like a dog. You've got Zor, the eagle continent, down the bottom here, with its tail, and you got mainland, Maine as in Maine, the unicorn continent. So it's very tongue-in-cheek, but it's not too bad in that. I've seen worse. That's the dog. It's a dog. But yeah, there's a lot there, and it's even got here where the hobs live, where the dwarves, where the elves, humans, and it's got the population centers, which you don't often get in world maps. And this is really good to actually have that here. You don't often get a keyed map like this. And you've got even more details here. I would love to have something like this in my games, because we don't have that these days, and it's all here. And this is the numbers and letters in the red boxes correspond to the locations of the 25 classic solo and GM adventures published by Flying Buffalo. So this is essentially where all the adventures happen. Awesome. Absolutely awesome. Of course, this is the very limited coloured section of the book. Oh yes, this is one thing I found. Above ground, below ground. It's got a sewer map or dungeon map of Undercity. Freaking awesome. You don't get to see these things. Like they rarely, like you don't have those types of things in the books. So I'm really impressed with it. We'll go back to the top and we'll go, yeah. So I want to actually play this. I want to check out the solo stuff, run solo games, solitaire games, and just explore this game. It's very different. Yes, it's got some really archaic ideas, but there's a lot of innovative ideas as well. The combat system, a little bit complicated, but that's the only thing you need to understand. The combat system and the rolls and the saving throw or saving rolls, which is your skill checks. Everything else, like you don't have modifiers. Like it's very rare to have modifiers, where a lot of systems, it's all about the modifiers on a really simple upfront system. This is a complex system with no modifiers or very little. So I still see it as a medium rules. It takes things a very different path, very different direction. Very archaic in parts, but so good. Check it out. Tunnels and Trolls Deluxe Edition. The Deluxe is the 9th edition. There was a French edition, which was French only edition, which was the 8th. There's a 7th edition, or sorry, a 5th and 5.5, which is like the 6th and 7th. It gets complicated. Gets really, really complicated. But check out the Deluxe. There's a lot of solo stuff out there, a lot of old content out there, and it's all compatible. Like even in this rules, it talks about all the bits and pieces that why the rules are changed, and if you're playing a previous edition, like a previous adventure, if this comes up, just use this instead. It tells you how to convert in-game live older editions in the calls. It's amazing. It understands where it is, where it's been, and it talks about it freely and openly. The other part about it, this is just, we've only touched on a few core things. I haven't even gotten to the, like, it's not errata, but what do they call it? Elaborations. So a full half of this book, or not half, but about a third of the book is the extra rules. And then you've got the Atlas, and then you've got adventures. So like a third of the book is the rules, a third of the book is the expansion of those rules, and then you've got the other bits and pieces. So there's a lot of this book, a lot to go through, a lot of interesting ideas, a lot of new takes on, like, they're old takes, but no one else has like really picked them up. But I think they work really well, and they know they understand when things have gone wrong, and they've changed it. So check it out, Tunnels and Trolls. There are drive-through RPG. Ask your local vendor. I highly recommend physical books. There is nothing better than actually having an absolutely physical book in your hand to read through. It doesn't have the bookmarks, the ribbons, which I'm impressed with, which I always love. Most of it is in black and white. There's only about 10-20 pages in the middle which are colored, but it's still a really nice quality product. Really, I check it out. So Flying Buffalo are the people that make this. So I'm going to head off. Thank you for everyone on YouTube. And we'll continue this on live stream. So bye. Oh, sorry, this was a long one, but it was a good one.